now. All right, well, welcome everybody to an amazing conversation we're going to have in regards to the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, a global Congress that's happening in Riyadh. And also we're going to be touching on the Congress as it's been coming to Melbourne, Riyadh in 2022 and Melbourne in 2023, with my two incredible guests, John Brumby and Julia Swanson, who I'll introduce to in a moment. And thank you very much for the attendees that are coming through. And I also do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we're all on. I'm presenting here from Ipswich with on the traditional home of the Yuggera people, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along and for attending. And thank you very much for the panelists. I would like to introduce and just read through the bios because it is fairly impressive. We're going to have a pretty rich conversation, I feel. So the Honorable John Brumby is the Chancellor of the Trobe University and a Professor Honorary at the University of Melbourne, well known for his role as a former Premier of Victoria from 2007 to 2010 and a Treasurer from 2000 to 2007, as well as his time in federal parliament during the Hawke Government. Since retiring from politics in 2010, John Brumby is taking on a number of roles in the not-for-profit and business sectors, including the chair of the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Trust, Citywide Service Solutions, BioCurate, and Into Science Advisory Board. Mr. Brumby is also recently appointed chair of the Victorian government's new $2 billion Breakthrough Victoria Fund. Very exciting. Mr. Brumby was awarded an Order of Australia in 2017 for distinguished service to the Parliament of Victoria, to economic management, medical biotechnology innovation, to improve rural and regional infrastructure, and to the community. Mr. Brumby is a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and the author of a number of articles and books, including the 2015 release of The Long Haul, Lessons from Public Life. John, it's very, very exciting to have you on board. Thank you.
Great to be on the panel. Thanks. Great. Thank you, Chad.
Would also like to introduce Julia Swanson, who's a passionate and driven tourism business events professional for over the last 20 years experience. In her experience, 11 years with the Melbourne Convention Bureau and as current CEO, Julia has contributed strongly to the growth and success of the organization in the global business events market. In her time as CEO, Julia has driven stronger strategic alignment with Visit Victoria through her role on the Visit Victoria leadership team and the overall benefit of the visitor economy. In 2021, Julia was appointed to the role of Vice President of the Association of Australian Convention Bureau, a demonstration of her leadership and expertise in the business events industry in Australia. She is currently on the board of the Best Cities Global Alliance, an alliance of 11 leading global cities that harnesses the power of collaboration and communities to create positive impact through business events. So Julia, thank you very much for coming along as well. I'm really looking forward to your insights on all things events, tourism, and the value that it brings.
Thanks, Chad. Great to talk to you today.
Excellent. And again, thank you very much for the attendees that are coming through. But we tend to keep these things fairly casual as we have conversations. So feel free to put things in the chat, add things to the Q&A, and we'll be getting through to those things as well. And Dave Lim, thank you very much for your greetings there from Melbourne as well. So we're here today to have a conversation about the GEC, the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, with a focus of what's going to be happening at the end of March in Riyadh. We are getting an Australian delegation together, and I guess I should introduce myself by way of background. I am the managing director for the Global Entrepreneurship Network in Australia, and the Global Entrepreneurship is a global body which supports entrepreneurship and innovation and the development of that capacity and capability in economies around the world, including functions such as the Global Entrepreneurship Week, as well as the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, one of the only events exclusively focused on building innovation ecosystems and supporting those who do that work, from investments to entrepreneurs, innovators, incubators, governments, policy, really at a high level. So the GEC typically brings in anywhere between 500 to 2,500 delegates, all focused at a global level on how we do this better, with real emphasis on how we do it better for all of humanity. For everybody in the community, not just for those who might have access. And so the reason why we're having John and Julia here to have a conversation is to really say, what is the value of an event like this? What would the value be for those going over as delegates to Riyadh? And with the announcement, we have to take a bit of care because we are doing a big announcement in March that Australia and particularly Melbourne is the host for 2023. But within these closed walls in a virtual world, we can kind of share a bit about it. What does that mean for Australia? So I'll start off with talking about the GEC in Riyadh. I might open up with yourself, John, as far as what something like this might mean for the delegates going over, what your experience has been like for kind of these global conferences of going there, getting some of this information and bringing it back in from an innovation perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Well, I guess I'd make just a preliminary remark about the timing, and the timing couldn't be better, because I think if there's one thing that there are many things, but if there's one big thing that COVID has really taught us over the last couple of years, it's the power of innovation and the power of entrepreneurship. And you look at the way in which the world has responded. There's been a new reality. We've had to see new medicines, new treatments, new strategies put in place by government. And to me, it's a great story about entrepreneurship. And I think you're seeing across the world, I know we're seeing it in Melbourne and across Australia, we're seeing new companies, new products and strategies, strong focus on business creation, governments in particular taking advantages of new technologies. And, the other day with my Trobe hat on, I was hosting a visit to our university by Moderna. They're a great example of a company, again, built around entrepreneurship, built around innovation, built around the investment in new technologies that's really grown from nothing to a major global company in the space of less than a decade. And so I think the timing couldn't be better. And I'll say this about Riyadh, that one of the things I learned in government as Minister for Innovation and then as Premier, I used to attend, as in the United States, the big biotech conference every year by USA, whether it was in Boston, whether it was in Washington, San Fran, LA. And we used to take a big Australian delegation. And we did that because there's immense value in the connections, in the networking, opening up to new ideas, new horizons, new ways of thinking, exchanging opportunities. And you can do some of that virtually, but I think Riyadh really has this great opportunity to bring people together at what is a challenging and time of great opportunity for the world. And so I'll certainly be encouraging as many Victorians and Australians to visit. And of course, as you've just let reveal in the top secret walls of this virtual discussion, we'll talk about it later, but Melbourne 2023, I think that's a wonderful place for us to have that, and we're very excited about it, but we can talk about it later.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that, John. And it's such a good point. When COVID came through, and I've heard so many people talk about it, where, is it obviously with significant respect to those who are significantly impacted, retail and tourism, and there's a lot of sectors that really have felt it. At the same time, you're absolutely right. Some of those who see the opportunities and how do we pivot, and even in some of those distressed sectors, we're seeing some significant innovations on entrepreneurs just overcoming that adversity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Julie, I know that we had a brief chat previously about obviously events is one of those areas that have been impacted. But now, as John says, no better time as things are starting to open up, but we desperately need that connection, that connectivity that you quite often can only get from that in-person event. So I'd love to hear from your really rich experience, the value that you see from some of these in-person events, and maybe from your depth of experience, what have you seen people take away from when they go off to a global event like this?
Sure, great. And look, I'd agree with John. It's perfect timing for everyone to reconvene. We've had a couple of years behind screens, and we know innovation and entrepreneurship thrives on people-to-people connections. So it's perfect timing with, especially now the announcement about Australia's borders reopening, international travel really starting to develop. So Riyadh will be a turning point, and I think the timing for Melbourne is really advantageous as well. So by the time March 2023 comes around, we should have good aviation access. I think people will be more confident to travel, and they're really looking to reignite themselves, I think, by getting that life experience that only travel can bring. So it's really exciting for us. From a destination perspective, firstly, the tourism and events sector has been very hard hit, and we're just starting to see that sort of starting to turn now. So we're really excited to bring the world back to Melbourne and away from the screens. So, this event, when it's held in Melbourne, will bring significant value to the economy. It fills the venues, it fills the hotels, the restaurants, the bars, and the entire supply chain that benefits from it, which is fantastic. So from tourism perspective, it's very valuable, but just from an economic perspective, getting all those sectors restarting is fantastic. So, we are on an island a long way from everywhere. So to be able to bring that global collaboration to Melbourne is fantastic. And I know the conference has been in places such as Istanbul, Johannesburg, Colombia, Italy, Russia. But it hasn't probably spent as much time in this part of the world. In fact, I don't think it will have been in Asia Pac for probably a decade. So to have that in Asia Pac and in Melbourne is a really significant moment to, allow Australian businesses to connect, maybe with people that they wouldn't have in any other way. So really exciting timing, and we're really excited to be able to support it and see what it can bring.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julie. And you make a really good point in terms of like it hasn't been in this area, and I often refer to, when it does come to Melbourne as far as a once in a generation event, because it's going to come here, but when will it come back to Australia? Because you have all these other countries that are wanting it, that are want to be bidding for it. And it also comes at a good point, not just with COVID. It's good that the borders are just opening up. I think Riyadh's going to be a great test point for some people to fly over there. It's probably what I'm hearing from people as far as it being incredibly safe. You have to show your green tick. It is, you got to be double vaxxed to get over there. The safety around the experience is going to be held in like the premier location within the capital city of Saudi Arabia there. When we think about where it's coming in the timeline of the Australian innovation ecosystem, and John, we had a brief chat before this started up as far as that history of where we're at right now, where we saw this explosion of innovation activity. We've had some government policies on and off from around the mid-90s of these overarching approaches. Ideas boom 2015, massive explosion of innovation ecosystem, hubs and incubators and spaces and programs, and now we're really starting to see that specialization. We're starting to see some advocacy happening with the Tech Council. We're starting to see some deep industry focus, some really impressive funds developing, which you're intimate with. So just want to talk about this happening, both the experience over in Riyadh to really build those global connections, and then following the year to come back and really embed those in. What role do you think this is going to have in the building the infrastructure of the innovation ecosystem in Australia, both for the trip over there to gain new learnings and have it here in Melbourne in 2023?
Well, I think as you said, it's going to build, Julia said, it's going to build those connections, it's going to build those links, which are so important to the innovation ecosystem. You think of the ecosystem, it's the networks, it's the connections, it's everything from the legal system right through to the formation of the company. It's the links with market need, it's skills and knowledge, it's the culture environment in which your country operates. Is there a focus on entrepreneurship, or is it a sort of, so it's all of those things. And the experience of Riyadh will be so beneficial, I think, in that regard, leading on to Melbourne. But there's a broader point, Chad, I want to make too for Australia, and that is, if you look at the 2021 Global Startup Ecosystem Report, and they look at the 30 areas around the world, the 30 ecosystems, 27%, more than a quarter of the top 30 in the world are in Australia's area. They're in the Asia Pacific. And so for Australia, here we are right at the footstep of more than a quarter of the global innovation and entrepreneurship hotspots in the world. And so I think the learnings from Riyadh, the connections, the networks, the learnings, and then coming to Australia and building on that, that's going to create great opportunities for us. And I think you mentioned, the evolution of this in Australia. We saw the other day, I know we'll talk later about my role as chair of the fund that the Victorian government has set up, huge thing, 200 million a year for 10 years, $2 billion, biggest ever. The federal government, the national government in Australia recently matched that Australia-wide with something very similar, really a mirror image of it, $2 billion, again, over a similar time period across all of the Australian states. And it's really focused around innovation, entrepreneurship, early intervention, translation of research into meeting market need. And so I think this environment's never been better. And here we are positioned at the footstep of Asia, more than a quarter of all of those hotspots. So the learnings from Riyadh, the networks, the connections, and bringing that back, and then building on that in Melbourne. And I should say in Melbourne, I'm sure Julia will talk about this later, but as I think of some of the big conferences we've had, going back to when I was a minister in government, the International Genetics Congress in 2004 was huge. Like, we had 34 Nobel laureates in Melbourne. And then when was it, Julia, 2015 or thereabout, the World AIDS Congress, which we had in Melbourne as well. So we've been the home to some of those really big conferences that have brought people from all around the world, that have then spawned really a wave of activity and new business startups, entrepreneurship off the back of it. I think we're going to see exactly the same with sort of Riyadh and Melbourne.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I do want to talk about that fund here and kind of where that sits in the scheme. But I want to build up on one of those points, Julia. We've spoken before about this concept of building the infrastructure, and what your experience has been, your unique perspective on seeing these kind of global events come and then really leave behind from a social infrastructure, even a physical infrastructure in the region, and really create that lasting legacy for, again, what we refer to as this once in a generation, very unique event. Maybe some of your thoughts on what you've seen in the past on what that might look like.
Sure, thanks, Chad. And look, I'll pick up on an example that John started with, was the World AIDS Conference that Melbourne hosted in 2014. Feels like not so long ago, but Melbourne, firstly, most broadly, has an incredible reputation for international conferences. We've got fantastic infrastructure in the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. It really is world class. We've got a 24-hour access airport. We've got 25,000 hotel rooms. We've got the events expertise and the supply chain to make these congresses fantastic. And we've had a history over the last decade of hosting events of probably up to about 20,000 delegates. And we've got probably another 3 of 20,000 delegates coming within the next 2 years. So, and the whole city gets behind them, like we do with the Australian Open or the Grand Prix. Everyone gets behind these and makes them a success. So state government work well with the convention centre, with the Convention Bureau, the City of Melbourne. So we really bring those events to life. It's not just you go into a venue, you walk in, you do the event and you walk away. The whole city gets behind it. So there'll be a whole raft of activity planning the city expertise. But beyond that, what makes our jobs rewarding is helping to create some of those legacy impacts for those events. So in the case of the World AIDS Conference, we really had the global spotlight on Melbourne for the period of a week. It brought about 12,000 delegates, contributed about 84 million to the Victorian economy, and 173 countries participated, which is just fantastic. And it was a multidisciplinary event. We had policymakers, we had government, we had activists, we had sex workers, we had clinicians, we had physicians, we had every type of person you can imagine. We had celebrities there, we had royalty there, and they all came in a way that GEC brings all different sectors and expertise. And it was just that, amazing explosion of experience and energy across the sector. So A whole number of legacies came out of that. We had policy commitments and goals for what AIDS and HIV would look like in 2020 and 2030. We had all the health ministers from the different states come together and set aligned goals and policies to help achieve it. We had the Melbourne Declaration about how AIDS and HIV should be managed in the country moving forward. We had amendments to discrimination laws, which came as a result of the conference. There was a huge amount of work done around community and acceptance of people with HIV and AIDS, which in all honesty hadn't probably been at the forefront of Australia's thinking, because we had a relatively low HIV problem in the decade leading up, but it brought that back, and we had 30,000 red ribbons with people wearing them across the city. There was a huge amount of education done of the tourism sector on how to work with people that have got HIV and AIDS, staying at the hotel and in the centre, and what their needs might be, and to think about it. We worked with the Burnett Institute primarily at the time, and that was sort of setting the scene for the Doherty Institute, which is now we're seeing everywhere, and what their contribution to the COVID response is. And Professor Sharon Lewin, who was the bid leader, took a leadership role. She's a Club Melbourne ambassador, has been a massive supporter for our sector. Just the profile of Melbourne internationally benefited as well. We had about 650 international media, either on site or covering it live. So we really were the global spotlight. So events like this are really transformative for the city, and bringing all those different stakeholders together. So I'm sure we'll, in the case of entrepreneurs, we'll see a very similar experience of the city banding together, and it'll be a fantastic event.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julia. So many rich insights that you just drew from there, from the culture change at a national and global level, positioning Melbourne and Australia as a thought leader in that area. I think we can point to a lot of the bio-related activities, particularly in the innovation area, that potentially spun out of that still remain down in Melbourne, because it is a bit of a focus area. And we are seeing that focus across Australia in different disciplines. And so that was probably a fairly keystone moment in that. And I also like how you talked about kind of that team building up to the event, because I'm very conscious, it's not the event itself, but it's actually the experience of creating that event that brings that tribe together, that brings that ecosystem together, which that in itself creates a legacy from those relationships at a local, national, and global level. I mean, I want to pick up on a point that Claire made, and for those of you that are watching this, please feel free to comment on different areas. And Claire mentioned that point about Australia's role in the Asia-Pacific entrepreneurial ecosystem is well made, but not something often spoken about. It strikes me this presents a good opportunity to play a stronger role in our region. And John, I just want to maybe get your thoughts on that of this notion that we are so close to so many different areas, and a great place for headquarters, a great place to be based out of, to then expand into those markets as a central area, and kind of that positioning of a business center of excellence, a hub for the region. Do you think something like this might be able to be more intentional about leveraging that, so it's not overlooked, as Claire mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that point often is overlooked. It's why I mentioned it before, and it's for Australia, we often talk about our trade and investment, and obviously, most of our trade and big trading partners are in that Asia Pacific region. But we've never thought of it in terms of entrepreneurship. And so this opens up a whole new opportunity. And as I said, of the 30 top hotspots around the world in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation, more than 27% of them are right on our footsteps. So same time zone, easy to get to, short flights, a lot of English language spoken, so no language difficulties. So this is a great opportunity for us. And your points about headquartering. But I think the other thing about Melbourne and Australia more generally is in many of these areas of entrepreneurship and innovation, if I can link the two, we've been a leader, and we continue to be a leader. And so I think many of the strategies that we put in place can be replicated in other economies and other places within our region. And I'm thinking particularly around some of the areas of the Pacific. So, what we've done in medical research, what we've done in early stage translation, what we've done with things like BioCurate Melbourne and Monash University coming together, $50 million to take early stage medical research and take it to the market the whole way through. It's a whole lot of these things that we've done where we've been global leaders, but here we've got the experience and the learnings, and we can share those with people in the region. And to go to Julia's point, I thought hers was a fabulous answer, by the way, of what came out of the International AIDS Conference. Doesn't seem like 8 years ago, but anyway, I'll take your word for it that it was 2014. It only seems a couple of years ago. All those immense benefits that come out of that. And, we often think at Melbourne Convention Centre, I remember when I took over as chair, one of our very early strategy days was, what's our single purpose? What's our goal? And obviously a key part of our purpose is to attract events and for the Victorian economy to get the economic benefit of that, jobs and so on. But actually we came down and we thought that's really important, but our major purpose is bringing people together. A major purpose is to bring people together, to network, to build connections, to share ideas, and to find solutions to challenges. That's the most important thing we do. And so Julia's answer before about what came out of that AIDS conference was just fantastic. All of those things that came off the back of it. And, 2 years ago at NCEC, when we opened the extension to our facility, we convened the first ever global conference on malaria. That there's lots of conferences on malaria, but this was the first one that ever brought together the people who, practice in the rural, remote areas, say of Africa or Papua New Guinea, through to the university researchers at Melbourne and Monash, and brought them all together. The drug manufacturers, the practitioners, the researchers, the marketers, the governments, brought them all together. We had 1,000 people doing that. And again, we've had lots of flow-on benefits for that through the connection. So I think our leadership, and I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but I think our leadership in many areas can be of great benefit to the region. I think some of the, we'll talk about this in a moment, what we've done with Breakthrough Victoria, that's a leadership thing. Launch Vic, which is about, is providing the environment to start up small businesses. And I often used to say of Melbourne and Victoria, we wanted to be, and I believe we are, the intellectual, cultural and sporting capital. But we can be the entrepreneurship capital as well. And, intellectual, cultural, sporting and entrepreneurship. And I know that's something that the Victorian government shares. And I think, again, our experiences and our leadership in this space can be really valuable right throughout the region.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And really great points. And kind of as you're talking, just thinking of that concept of innovation as the exportable product to make a global impact as an opportunity. And absolutely, the work that LaunchVic has done, and both sides, from a community-driven startup Victoria, from a government-driven LaunchVic, from a lot of the university programs down there, a lot of strength. We are positioning as far as an Australian front for this, which is with Victoria and Melbourne as leads, because we do want to get that flow-on effect both before and after the conference. We got South Start in Adelaide ramping up the week before the conference in 2023. We've got some events that'll be happening afterwards in Queensland and Northern Territories, and so really giving that full delegate experience where it's additive. It is across the board, but absolutely the work that's been done in Melbourne is incredible. I want to pick up on Dave's point, and Julia, get your thoughts on this, where he says the overseas connections to markets and investors are vital for innovation startups to scale and sustain. What wider or deeper strategic connections does Victoria most need, and to where? And that really highlights this opportunity we have with Riyadh happening, so we can start some of those conversations if they're not happening already, to carry over then to say, how do we make Melbourne the best that it could be? But from your experience, Julie, as far as those global connections that you've seen, you've touched on a few of them with the example from the AIDS conference. But what do you think is needed most? Yes, Victoria has a lot currently to offer, and John, I'll throw to you after this for a similar response or for your views on it. What do you think, not not so much what's missing, but if we were to do something in addition to what we already have or on top of, what could we do that's new? What more could we have?
Sure. Well, that's a very broad question. Where do we start with that? But look, I think one of the unique things about this conference is it covers so many different sectors: medical, scientific, climate, aviation, ICT, many streams. And I think there's even a female entrepreneurship focus, which sounds fantastic. So it's something I'm pretty excited about. So I think it's really, we've got some time to think about what are the strengths that we want to showcase internationally, what are the sectors that we want to accelerate, what are the current strengths, where are the gaps, and what can we leverage now? Both, not just, obviously you're talking to two passionate Victorians here, so we do look through that lens, but when we did do the bid, we noticed a lot of the other states and national bodies got behind it. So I think it's really just thinking through that content design, that program design, and then how do we leverage our international network? So there's a lot of areas across government, across academia and the private sector that have got those international networks that we might have now, or the ones that we want to develop. And I know certainly we'll work with Global Victoria, Invest Victoria, Launch Vic, and some of those other bodies about mapping out where are those opportunities. And look, a lot of the things I talked about with the AIDS conference happened organically through the planning. Some of them were accidental benefits and some of them were planned. And we've had other conferences that a lot of thought has gone into designing the outcomes at the early stage. So another conference that was held in Melbourne that was highly successful was the Intelligent Transport Conference in 2016, which was another significant event, both for the tourism sector, but also for transport and technology. And that really was designed to showcase technology and transport and build those collaborations. So a lot of the stakeholders involved in that conference sat down probably a year or two out, like we are now from the Melbourne conference, and went, what do we want to launch there? What do we want to plan? What connections do we need? What expertise do we have? What do we not have? And what do we want to build? And in that planning process, the state government and then a lot of the private sector worked together to go, all right, well, that's a great opportunity to showcase driverless technology on a global stage. So some of the work that was done in the year or two leading up, there was increased investment, increased research and commercialization of some of those products. And then the conference was used as a launch pad to launch that and then, drive investment and growth from there. So it's about having all those stakeholders together, planning out some goals and outcomes, and it'll probably be a mixture of planned outcomes, then accidental outcomes, which comes from the power of those face-to-face connections. So a lot of great potential, I think.
Yeah, it's a great answer, Julia, in response to, it really is up to those holders of that knowledge of the discipline and the focus areas from the sectors and the technologies and the impact areas and the difference they want to make. So you have people out there absolutely passionate about female entrepreneurship and addressing regional inequality or whatever that area is, or agriculture or space, bio, and they will bring what they know is the gap. And I guess our role, is to facilitate that environment to best make that a conducive opportunity for them. Appreciate that. Thank you. John, love to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe specifically to what really is just an amazing point in the Australian ecosystem with the Breakthrough Victoria Fund. And as you mentioned, kind of the national leveraging on top of that. Love to hear more about that, as well as what you've seen as far as what needs is that going to be addressing, and where you see things happening and going in the innovation ecosystem in Australia through the lens of that Breakthrough Fund. You've got this fund, but where's that going to be pointed at and what's needed most, which ties into the conversation around the GEC and how we can best leverage that.
Okay, thanks, Chad. And just the quick, 3-minute summary on Breakthrough Vic. So, funded by the Victorian government, state-owned enterprise, So we're a registered company, independent board of directors, which I chair. We have 9 directors. We'll be going to 8 in the next month or two. Diversity of skills amongst the directors, from digital, medical research through to successful entrepreneurs. We've got 200 million a year times 10 years. We're required to work across 5 priority sectors. They're not the only sectors, but the priority sectors: health and life sciences, advanced manufacturing, clean tech, digital, and agri-bio. And I must say the fund that the federal government has announced recently covers those areas as well, but they've added space and defence. So a lot of similarity in the approach there. So we're after impact. We'll be building around, but not exclusively, some of the great precincts and ecosystems in Victoria. So places like Monash University, La Trobe, Bundoora, Parkville around Melbourne University, and Arden Macaulay, Fisherman's Bend, and Warren Ponds in Geelong. So not exclusive, but they're great ecosystems already. And we're going to be investing right across the life cycle, from frontier technologies, so looking at things like quantum computing, right through at the other end to investments in advanced manufacturing. And in the middle there, sort of catalyst for growth, catalyst for change, early stage translation. A big difference between us and what governments have done in the past: governments have been in the grant business. Here's a grant for $1 million. I'll give you this if you do that. We've got complete flexibility. So much of what we will be doing will be equity. So we'll be taking equity positions. We'll be investing directly into VC funds, fund of funds. So we can take equity, we can do convertible notes, we can do loans, we can do just about, and we can do grants. So a big focus though on what we want to do is really this: it's early stage translation, it's mobilization of IP, it's turning good ideas into great businesses. And the truth is, if you look at the Australian innovation ecosystem, we've always been really good in Australia at research, particularly good in Victoria, Melbourne, the 2 big universities. But in terms of how we translate that, in terms of how we turn that research into businesses, we've been pretty poor. That's the truth of the matter. And a lot of it is at that early stage translation, sort of proof of concept stage, first valley of death coming out of universities, but not exclusively. Part of it's been the culture, part of it's the legal system, part of it's the regulatory environment. I think all of that is changing. And you've now got this huge investment by the Victorian government. We've seen before, by the way, sorry, I know I've gone over my 3 minutes, but going back to the time I was in government, we invented this program called Science, Technology and Innovation. We spent back then a couple of $100 million a year on what was a global leading program. After a decade, we've recently had that independently reviewed, and what it showed was a leverage, a benefit cost ratio of more than 4 to 1. So for every dollar, so in terms of new businesses, new pharmaceuticals, new therapeutics, all of the things that you could create through that investment, it's been spectacularly successful. So I think we'll see that again with Breakthrough. To those, we're open for applications. We've got a lot before us at the moment. We've funded our first project, it's number 1 in every sense. It's a joint venture with Melbourne Uni, number 1 university in Australia, Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, number 1 medical research institute in Australia, CSL, number 1 pharmaceutical company in Australia, and Breakthrough Vic. And this is creating 2 floors of wet lab space in basically CBD location, Parkville CBD, in CSL's new building, so that all of that great research which takes place doesn't just die on the vine, it moves through, it's got the opportunity to develop, and it's backed with mentoring, it's backed with Startup Vic, with Launch Vic, with finance, so that people can move that research into new business. And so I call that entrepreneurship, responding to opportunities, moving quickly, bringing together networks, people and technology. And so we're doing that here in Melbourne. So that's Breakthrough Vic, where, and to go back to your point previously about, Riyadh and so on, we're Breakthrough Vic. I don't want to promise we're going to do something in this space, but we are not closed off to international collaborations. At the end of the day, we want to invest in things that will generate jobs and activity in Victoria. But going back to when I was the Premier who signed the $5 million VizTech with Israel. So it was a $10 million fund, $5 million from each of us to encourage medical devices, entrepreneurship and medical devices. So we did that with Israel. So we're looking again, are there partnerships? Whether it's with Saudi Arabia, whether it's with UAE, whether it's with the United States, whether it's with Israel, Singapore, whether we can, if there's, I'm not talking hundreds of millions, but small scale agreements, JVs, where the focus is on innovation, entrepreneurship, and the creation of new businesses, we're very open to it.
Excellent. Thanks for that, John. And yeah, and to that point, like, again, I don't have, I haven't firmed up the complete delegate list because it's still forming the next month and a half, but from the caliber of the people I've seen, they are the kind of people that would be doing those deals. Obviously, for the people that Saudi Arabia is going to be getting people around with their focus, much like we will in Melbourne, but it really provides that opportunity to start those conversations. And I love how you kind of framed the development of that fund over time to really now being at that point where it can make the most impact and learning from the past, that 4-to-1 ratio, and say, well, we know these things work, take what worked from the past, learn the lessons from maybe some of the things that we can learn from in the past. And I think we're at a great position now. And thank you very much for chairing it and heading it up and kind of the leadership role you take there.
Thank you.
So I might just start wrapping this up. Dave from the chat does kind of top in there, and big shout out to Melbourne, who has a great diversity of sectors: arts, sports, animation, agri, etc. And talks about unique opportunities and cross-disciplinary ideas. And it is, I know, Julia, that's something that you and I spoke about, is where these events help facilitate the truth about innovation, which is the cross-section of completely disparate ideas, the serendipitous collisions that we talk about. And how we can achieve that. And Claire just points in there as far as the ability to do that at an international level, where international collaboration gives an easy step into the international market. Great at doing it in Australia, much like you mentioned before, Julia, the continent countries, but breaking outside to get those collisions. As we wrap up, I just want to throw it to both of you just briefly, kind of any final thoughts as we've been talking around, you've been listening to each other, we've been bouncing off each other really well, on any final messages to people, one, thinking about going to Riyadh in 2022, and secondly, what people can do to prepare for 2023. Obviously, we're putting some things out there for working groups and steering committees. But from your experience, both in events, Julia and John, from your intimate knowledge in the ecosystem, what can the delegate prepare for going over there, and what can we prepare for in 2023?
Sure. Look, I think it's a great opportunity. As John said, Riyadh is sort of the start of the reopening after we've had a tough couple of years with COVID. So it's time to get out from behind the screens and get involved. So I think there's some great opportunities to go experience, get a taste of what it's all about, and build some connections, which we can then build on further from Melbourne. And I guess for the companies thinking about what their experience could be in Melbourne is start to think about what outcomes that you want to deliver for your sector, what collaborations could happen, not just within your own, I guess, vertical sector, but between sectors. And that's where sometimes the magic happens, when you have people from very diverse backgrounds colliding and think, well, there's relevance here, or there's a potential connection or collaboration. So start planning for what those could be. Keep an eye on the content, the expertise, get involved in working committees, as you said, and start reaching out to build those collaborations in advance. And also think about what you could bring to the show and how you could get involved. So it's a really exciting time, and I know as a destination we'll help support that ecosystem and make it the most successful event we can.
Excellent. Thank you, Julia. John?
Yeah, so I think just to add to that, we're certainly looking now with our Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre hat on and Breakthrough Victoria hat on, what we can do really to build on Riyadh and in that period between Riyadh and Melbourne. So are there events that we can run? Are there, virtual activities that we can run to really build up to Melbourne and, build on the networks, the connections, the learnings out of Riyadh, and then build that for Melbourne so that we create and generate even more value out of Melbourne. So we're looking at that at the moment, Chad. And I think, as I said before, the timing's good. Timing's good from the perspective of, as Julia has said, with opening up and what was the old Russian, perestroika, was that opening up or was it glasnost? I always get the two mixed up. Who's good in Russian? I can't. Anyway, so we've got the opening up again, and then, you've got Breakthrough, and you've got now a stronger federal focus in this space. And so there's a real opportunity to do some things and, create value, create new businesses, create new solutions for the problems we've been facing. So we're looking forward to how we can build on that. But I think it's great timing to do it.
Agree, John, and thank you for that. And absolutely creating that cadence leading up to both events. That's what we're looking to do, getting the people around the table. We don't know what we don't know. And so really bringing those people along, even some of the people in chat who have answers that we may not, such as Claire, who says glasnost equals openness.
Glasnost is openness. That's what we've got. It's glasnost.
Glasnost. Excellent. So again, just proof in the pudding right here that you get that diverse group around us, and we'll get even further. And just quickly out to Thomas, who's asking the question as far as if they have team members over in Riyadh, is there an opportunity to meet up with the Australian delegation? Absolutely. We're trying to just get this a biggest cohort as possible, even expats that are out and about. I know when I went to Bahrain over in 2019, they all came in and put their koala pins on and definitely represented. So it was a good experience. So if you're out there, we'd love to see you over in Riyadh. And if you're in Australia thinking about going along, we are getting the delegation together. We've got a bit of a cheat sheet on travels and vaccines and insurances and all that kind of stuff. So trying to make that process as easy for you as possible. But John, Julia, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Incredibly valuable conversation. We have recorded this so other people can learn from this and get inspired. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Surely. Thanks, Chad.
Great to talk.
Thanks, Julia. Cheers.